Hi, leaders. It's Rick Miller, your tiny habits and balance over speed coach, with another of the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership by John Maxwell. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorites, the law of process. Reason it's one of my favorites is that I'm a distance runner and a long distance person, and I have learned the law of process, which states that leadership develops daily, not in a day. So, we're going to talk about a great example in American history of someone who also, like me, started out with asthma and a few other physical challenges and was able to overcome them and develop his leadership. We're also going to talk about leadership learning styles, and then we're going to go back and spend a little more time doing some visioning about where the daily process is leading you to. So let's get started. When you think of Teddy Roosevelt, TR as he was referred to, what comes to mind? I know for me, being a rough rider, being a wild game hunter, all those things I know about. Getting the Panama Canal built. I didn't know he won a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace between Russia and Japan, but he also set up our national parks. Certainly, he was a man of action and activity. In fact, a British historian called him the most able president since Lincoln, the most rigorous and vigorous since Jackson, and the most bookish since John Quincy Adams. So that's kind of what we think of TR. And how does that relate to the law process? Well, stay tuned because it didn't start that way. Teddy Roosevelt really epitomizes the law of the process because while we know all those great things about his life, what you may not realize is that he was born a very sickly and weak child. He was born to a wealthy family in Manhattan, and by age 12, it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to go very far because of the fact that he had asthma, something I relate to. Well, his dad looked at him and set him down and said, Teddy, you have a fine mind, but you won't go far with that mind unless you must work your body, because your mind won't go farther than your body can take you. Well, Teddy actually took that to heart and he began the law process. Here's what he did. Every day thereafter, he did something physical. He lifted weights. He learned to box. He would jog. He did any and everything he could. And then, in addition, he didn't neglect his mind. He started reading about great men that he admired and used that admiration and their achievements to fuel his determination and discipline to keep going. That's how, by the time he graduated from college, he was definitely one of the most in shape people you'd ever met and was already mentally well prepared for a very rigorous life. So he really did go from a weakling to a rough rider. Now, here's the thing, he definitely proved the law of process that little by little each day will yield extraordinary results. In order to practice the law of process, it's going to lead you into the fact that to grow in your leadership is a long term continuous improvement project. What we found from studies from like Warren Bennis and Bert Nanis, who are great management consultants, studied 90 leaders and found all of them had a growth mindset. And if you know anything about growth mindsets, that'll lead you to Carol Dweck's wonderful book on the growth mindset. And what you find is that most leaders basically didn't start out saying, I'm going to just be a continuous learner. No, they knew that they had some goals of where they wanted to get to. And somewhere along the line, they came to the aha moment of, I don't know what I don't know. And they realized that they got to that moment and said, you know, I know there's things I need to know, but I don't know them yet. And so they start looking as, okay, if I want to grow into this position, I know I need to learn some things. And so they start looking at it, and their growth mindset leads them toward the next aha moment, which is, I know what I need to know now. Doesn't mean they know it, but they've recognized that there's some information or knowledge they're trying to gain. And so they go to where I know, and I start learning that, and it starts to show. And eventually, because like Teddy Roosevelt, who stayed at it, by the time he was elected president, He simply did what he needed to do because he'd been on such a continuous law of the process learning that he would just simply go, and I know what I know, and it showed. What we're talking about is becoming unconsciously competent at continuous learning. When you're unconsciously competent, what that means is you have developed a habit, because a habit is nothing more than that. But you've got to go through the process of being consciously incompetent, meaning I don't know what I don't know, or I know that I don't know it well enough, to where you keep at it and eventually your knowledge becomes just a secondary habit. And that's what the law process is all about and what Teddy Roosevelt showed us so well. When you really start thinking about applying the law process, it's going to lead you into developing your own personal growth plan. I found that Michael Hyatt's and Daniel Harkany's book, Living Forward, helped me develop my own personal growth and life plan, and I highly recommend it because it's got some wonderful tips and it freed me up to focus on what I wanted to. Here's what I learned in that process I want to share with you. One, if you don't set aside time to focus on this, and I mean to just block out some time to really have freedom to think through your growth plan, it can be very hectic and you can end up doing less than an optimal job. Number two, to do that, you've also got to make sure that as you look at your plan and you start rolling it out, the law process says that, as Stephen Covey points out in his wonderful book, you need to focus on time and block out time that's important but not urgent. Because a growth plan is always important, but it's not as urgent as what may be in front of you at your work or in your home life. So block that time out and guard it because it will pay dividends. Once you've got it done, you need to look at it daily. I have found that the law process suggests that leadership is built daily, not just, okay, I've done it, put it on a shelf. And it helps to not only look at it daily, but analyze it monthly. And the best way to analyze it monthly, of course, is to have an accountability partner. I found that my accountability partner is one of the most crucial parts of any success I achieve toward my growth plan because it reminds me I've got to talk to Chris this week. Lastly, we all know this, that if you're a leader, the best thing you can do is help other people, but you can't help people develop their own growth plan unless you're willing to first put yours in place. Because as you well know by now as a leader, leadership is caught. It can't be taught. You can't tell them what to do. You've got to do it. You've got to live it. And if you don't live it, it's very hard to pay it forward. Okay, leaders, this is one of the favorite parts of this self-examination mirror time. What I want you to do is I hope you've started working on your plan, and one of the major things I want you to start with is think about where you'd like to be in 3 years as a result of your personal growth plan. And I mean be specific. Where would your day at the work be? What would your home life be? What kind of trips would you be taking? What might you be doing differently as a result of putting your law process daily growth plan into place? And where will that leave you in 3 years? Now, if you're a leader of an organization, I hope that you'll do the same thing as you probably already do, and that is think about what kind of culture would result if you put together a personal growth plan and then created that kind of a value system within your company. Because as we know, performance is downstream from culture. And so, what would your company look like in terms of scale? What would performance look like if everybody in your organization was working on a personal growth plan and continuous improvement was one of the things that they enjoyed about working with your organization? And I hope for this that you really don't take what I'm saying here and instead book a cruise to Someday Isle. Because Someday Isle is one of those things where this makes sense, and as soon as I get a chance, I'll do it. Someday Isle is a mirage, and you need to know that the sooner you get started on the law process with your growth plan, the better. Okay, leaders, here's your assignment before our next session. I want you to think deeply about somebody you admire that you wonder how they got to where they are, that you think man, if I could follow in their footsteps or if I could learn from them, it'd be wonderful. Of course, John Maxwell is the master of this. He, for years, would book vacations around calling up someone he admired and saying, I'm going to be in your area. I would like to see if I could get 30 minutes of your time. And of course, one of his favorites was spending time with John Wooden, the UCLA wonderful coach. So here's what I want you to do. Think of somebody and book a time and ask them some questions like I've listed here. One of the great ones is, who did they learn from? Who was their model? Teddy Roosevelt's, of course, was his dad. But what books did they read? Teddy read books of people about biographies of people he admired, but you may find what books were impactful for them, and then what kind of improvement habits have they developed? Now, here's the takeaway. After you do that, you need to write down what you've learned, what were your takeaways from the interview, and then put it in action by starting to read one of the books that they recommended. And here's the last tip that I didn't put down here, but it never hurts. In fact, it always helps. Be sure and write them a nice handwritten thank you note for their time, and make sure that you put into action some of the recommendations that they did. Well, that's pretty much it. On to the next one. And never forget, it's always too soon to quit, and it's never too early to start learning and growing. See you at the next session.